everyone, and welcome to our next gen training, How to Embrace a Growth Mindset. My name is Emily Jarvis, and I am the events manager here at GovLoop. And today I have the added pleasure of also being your moderator. So thanks so much for joining me. And before we get into today's session, I just want to note that the agenda for our May Next Gen Summit is available now. So if you want to check that out, you can find that in the resources section. But on to today's topic, because you may have come across this concept of a fixed or a growth mindset at some point in your educational journey or your career. And the idea really boils down to the difference between the two. A fixed mindset really means that someone regards their skills and abilities as unchanging, whereas a growth mindset views intelligence, skills, and abilities as dynamic and improvable. So today, our experts will dive into these frameworks and explore the power of shifting to a growth mindset at work, something we need especially right now. But before we get into all of that, I do have a few housekeeping notes to go over with you all. First things first, if you are looking for our resources, you can find those in the resources tab. That's also where you can find a little bit more information about our speakers and the slides for today's session. If you need to access the closed captioning feature, look for that show captions icon along the bottom panel, and that's where you can find that as well. Of course, we hope you don't have any technical difficulties, but this is a technology platform and they can and do happen. If you have an issue, just hit that Q&A tab and my colleague Maddie will get your questions answered. You can submit questions to our speakers in that same tab as well, or you can submit them in the webinar chat. We've got a few people in the chat already telling us where they're logging in from. I am in Rockville, Maryland. I see Cassandra is also a Marylander, so we love to see that. Thank you, everybody who is joining. We are recording this training and we'll send you a link to the on-demand version tomorrow, so you can, of course, watch it again or send it along to one of your colleagues. All right, with all of that housekeeping out of the way, I want to remind folks that we are going to be providing one CPE credit for today's training. So in order to get that CPE credit, here's what you're going to do. You're obviously going to attend this whole entire webinar. You're going to complete the 3 polling questions, and you'll take that post-event evaluation. You do those 3 things, and we will be sending you a link to your CPE certificate. All right, with all of that housekeeping out of the way, let me introduce you to our speakers. Ty Smith is the principal consultant at Go In Now LLC. We also have Javier Enclon, who is the Assistant Inspector General for Management at the National Science Foundation's Office of the Inspector General. And last but certainly not least, we have Josh Martin, who is the founder for Martin Innovation and Data AI Solutions. We have 3 terrific speakers joining us. And to get things started, I had Ty pull together a presentation to really lay the groundwork for this fixed versus growth mindset. So with that, Ty, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Well, thank you, Emily. I appreciate it. And welcome everybody, all 140 plus people who are here today. I was very, very intrigued by the topic. And Emily said, "Hey, would you be willing to do this?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." But I was happy when I saw that there were 2 other gentlemen that'll be joining me today to kind of talk about this, because I think it is not just what I have to offer, because, I have thoughts, but I think it is in the aggregate when we all come together and we start to think about this in terms of potential and what some of you may have heard as Ikigai, which is a Japanese word. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But when we think about the topsy-turvy world that we have right now, it is the purview of being able to think about how to continue to grow and not to stay stagnant that helps us make sense of the world. And so our humanness, what makes us human, is our search for certainty, our search for putting things together in ways that make sense to us. So if you look at this slide to the left, it's we have squares and circles and triangles, and we spend our lives making sense of it, finding an algorithm, finding the patterns within this so we can make certain choices. But ultimately, we're faced with this squiggly line of, I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing. This does not make any sense to me. I wish somebody would help me. And so we spend our lives in search of putting all of this stuff together. And it locks us in some ways, or it makes us incapacitated. So we either doing on the left and search for the algorithm, or we get trapped in scratching our head like the figure has, trying to make sense of it. But ultimately, it comes down to how we think about how our brains work. This is based on the work of Daniel Kahneman, who was, by the way, a psychologist who you may have heard of him. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. He's a psychologist who won a Nobel Prize for behavioral economics. And he says that we have two systems in our brain. System one is the way that most of us make decisions. It's fast, it's unconscious, it's automatic. It's the thing that allows us to make everyday's decisions that we don't have to think about. I know that as a kid, and when I was dating somebody in Philadelphia and it was midnight and I'm driving home, and there was that time where I go, hour and a half later, I leave Philadelphia on my way back home and I have no idea how I even got there. It was automatic. It made no sense. It was actually pretty scary. But think about our system two, the way that we actually think about ideas. We have to slow down. System two is the one that's more purposeful. It's about making complex decisions, but it is more reliable. Check this out. Here's the difference that we all know, system one versus system two thinking. If you are driving somewhere and your GPS isn't on and you get lost or you're trying to figure out and the radio's blaring, what's the very first thing that you do? You turn down the radio. Why? It makes no sense. The radio and your ability to think in terms of noise have nothing to do, but it's a resource drag. When you're trying to listen to the radio, when you're trying to understand, hey, where I'm going, these things are resource drags. And so we need to have being able to think about which system that do we deploy. But what's interesting about this whole idea in terms of the system, how does it manage when we have a lot of uncertainty? As a matter of fact, how do we learn? How do we continue to learn? And growth and learning are twins, right? Growth and learning are twins. But when you have so much uncertainty, when you have that squiggly line of, I can't just put things in an algorithm. I can't just make a system one decision. I now have to think kind of hard. What do I do? How do I manage that? It becomes really difficult. And so some of us spend a lot of time trying to have to deal with these twins in our head, system one versus system two, of growth versus fixed, growth versus fixed. And so in a fixed mindset, as Emily pointed out, and rightfully so, and thank you, Emily, it's a belief that our abilities and our intelligence are innate and unchangeable. They can't change. They won't change. That is, they're locked in. Who we are and how we show up is immutable from the time we are born to the time we die. That's a fixed. I can only do what is given to me by the genetics that I inherited from my parents, and I won't be able to do anything else. It's the only thing that I can do in terms of how I show up at my job. It's the only thing that I can do is how I show up as a son, a daughter, or relative. It is fixed and it will never be changed. Versus a growth mindset defined as the belief that you can improve your abilities and your intelligence through practice and through effort. I tell my sons, I have a 21-year-old who is a fourth year mechanical engineering student who's like, oh my God, it's just so hard. I say, well, guess what? You continue on, it'll get better. You just can't quit. But you have to take those failures and convert them into the energy to grow even more skill. And we all know this. I'm not saying anything that you all don't know. These are the things that make us who we are, potentially. And so what we want to talk about today is the balance, the tipping point between the fixed mindset, oh, and by the way, not a bad thing, and the growth mindset, by the way, not always the best thing. But how do you find those two? And even though we're talking today about the growth mindset, there are some things that you don't want to have in terms of fixed versus growth. Here's an example. A very long time ago, I was 18 years old. Somebody had the infinite wisdom to make me a police officer. And I don't know why, but they did, and they gave me everything that came, all the accoutrement that came with being a police officer, the gun, the badge, the ability to arrest somebody. The reason why they hired me is because I was faster than anybody that they had on the police force. And so I was a state champion runner, and so I could run after people. My growth mindset that I was born with was inappropriate for me chasing down some people, which is my fixed mindset, because I needed to be able to find somebody. So if I was running down an alley and I saw somebody, say, which way did they go? I didn't want to have a learned ability. I wanted to ask open-ended question. I wanted to continue on. Now I do. I just want to know where they went. So I had to deploy my fixed ability at the appropriate time, but also have the ability to understand how do I create new opportunity. And so that's what we want to understand. We want to talk about this growth, fixed versus growth. And it's locked in, right? We saw it before, but here are some of the things that challenge us in our brains. We have to have this ambidextrous. In other words, need to be able to deploy both sides of our brains. We want to be able to learn from failure, but also understand what it means for mistakes. We want to be able to view challenges as opportunity, but also avoid running into walls. And so how do we balance these? How do we bring them both to bear? And so we don't get lost in our abilities. But as we see with the brain in this last slide, that's about people. But what does it mean for our organizations? How do I how do I bring to bear this idea of a growth mindset for our organizations? Particularly, ladies and gentlemen, we have this thing called VUCA. And some of you may have heard of VUCA before. Some of you may have heard of VUCA before. And what does it stand for? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. In chaos, that's how we see it. We see VUCA as a completely bad thing. We see it completely bad. And a lot of us are experiencing the uncertainty that's going on right now. Excuse me. But we have the opportunity to create vision, to create understanding, to have some clarity, to be agile. That's the growth mindset. If we only see this VUCA as volatile, the uncertainty, the complexity and ambiguity, but don't maintain a growth mindset of vision, of understanding, of clarity and agility, guess what? We get stuck. And when you get stuck, you can't think your way out of a problem. And so what we want to be able to do is to think about how do we manage this complex world that we're seeing ourselves in, where something is changing all the time. We have to have, I would offer you that we have to have a way to think about it that holds this idea of growth. Some of you may have heard of this notion of Plato's cave. And it's a story about how people get stuck and they can only see what they can see because the only thing that matters is what's right there in front of them. And that the what is otherwise possible that's outside the cave they can't see because all they have is what is the projections of others. What's the projection of their organization? What is their current circumstance? And so the growth mindset allows you to get outside of the cave and see that there's other opportunities. I had a friend of mine who was a special operations certified Marine. And the thing that he always told us when we were working together, that in the Marine Corps, they say constraints breed opportunity. Constraints breeds opportunity. And so if I have a growth mindset, it's not that I'm stuck. Somebody wrote in the chat, there's a resource drag. Yes, there is. But if I know that I'm constrained in the resources, what are the opportunities on the other side? If I can see, oh, there's something else that's an opportunity, there's something else that's out there that's beyond what my current circumstance and all that I have, all the resources that I have, then I will always stay in the cave, in the cave. And so the question is, how do we embrace this growth mindset? You can actually build this out. This is something that you can move towards. It takes effort. It is not easy. It's system two thinking. It's do I have the capacity to learn in the face of change? Can I find challenges and welcome them as a part of what I have to offer the world? Am I in a space of having continuous improvement to do that, to go and do something different? Just before I jumped on, I had a conversation with a young man that was getting to learn me, and during our conversation, he became a bit emotional. And he said, "I'm sorry." I'm like, "Why? Why would you become sorry?" Well, I don't want to show my humanity. And I said, "Ooh, you're human. You are human. That's the only thing that you come into this world with, right? That's what differentiates you from the other phylum, the species around the world. You are human." But in order to do this growth, you need to have some humility. Well, guess what the root word of humility is? It's to be human. And so the question is, and I'd like to offer these up as we are moving into our conversation, how do I have a growth mindset that is generative versus a fixed mindset that is performative? How do I generate these genuine focus on my resources, on building out versus a performative? I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do. How can I have a growth mindset that is transformational versus a fixed mindset that is transactional? Can I embrace the effort to learn, the welcome challenge, and the continuous improvement? Can I have a accretive? In other words, I am increasing value of my relationship with other people in my growth mindset versus a zero sum game of, well, I can only do this and I'm still pushing out and making sure that I get ahead. Can I have a attitude of innovation versus the attitude of stagnation? And for me, this comes as an ultimate in terms of, is it life giving in growth, or a slow slog to completion in fixed? I called it death, but I don't want to say, sorry, it's life and death. I don't want to be so cavalier, Emily, to say it's life or death, but it really does. I had a conversation with a young man about the difference between what gives life and what makes you live. Like, you go to a job, I feel life giving to others and to myself, right? And so, can I do that? Can I have that space? Well, one way to think about this, and this is where the Ikigai comes in, which is this Japanese idea of mission, vocation, my profession, and my passion. What does the world need from me? What am I good at? What can I get paid for? And what do I love? If I'm able to have my Ikigai as a way to think about my growth patterns, the things that are useful, the things that are life giving, the things that allow me to show up every day and feel like I am contributing to the world, I think that was when you really start to think about how you can build a space for yourself and for others that's not just about you growing, but also your community, your organization, and your families to grow. And so I was just reading a very interesting novel. I just started reading it. I don't know how many of you have ever read The Alchemist. It's a wonderful book. I would recommend it. It's very short. It's like 150 pages. It's not very long. But it says ultimately that when you're on your journey to fulfill your personal legend, the thing that gives you life, your growth patterns, the entire universe will conspire to help you get there. The entire universe will help to inspire you to get you there. And so, what we want to do is to have a conversation with you, myself, Javier, and Josh, and Emily. We want to have a conversation with you. So, we're encouraging you to have this conversation with us in the chat. And so as we come along, literally, if you feel like there is some really fantastic insight or some question about our experiences around growth, we encourage you to join us and have this conversation. Think of it as a interactive podcast, if you were. Emily, over
Um,
to you.
Thank you so much, Ty, for laying the groundwork for us. Because I think without having some really robust thoughts in place, this conversation can definitely go in a bunch of different directions. So, like he mentioned we encourage you all to put your questions in early and often into the Q&A portal or into the chat. But I am actually going to get started by launching a poll for you, our attendees. And for this one, we want to know, do you feel like you operate with a growth mindset? And Josh, I'm going to come to you
Great
first
question.
here in this next portion, because I think what Ty really outlined is that you need to be really intentional when you're thinking through a growth mindset. What advice or best practices do you have for harnessing that enthusiasm or that power from within?
You know, I think that there's so many opportunities now with the resources that we have out there, whether it be YouTube, or other open source learning, or just ways to kind of get out and get explore different things that are happening. That, man, just be curious. Be
Yeah.
curious and don't be afraid to go and get hands on something. Don't be afraid to, dive into something. Spending some time with it, find out the things that you're passionate about. And the only way that you can really do that is if you're diving into it. I never saw myself getting to where I ended up in my career. It's not what I went to school for. It wasn't my original path. And I had a very interesting growth pattern in state government, because usually it's a move out to move up. And I was very fortunate to stay in the same organization and move up to eventually become the chief data officer of the state. And a lot of that was just continuing to be curious and continuing to learn, continuing to engage, seeking uh, that opportunity to be mentored and to get feedback. And all of those things were really important across my journey. And I think it's kind of common for across the board, is just be curious, really spend some time out there thinking about what your passion is. Be intentional about the things that you're doing. If you're not passionate about something, know that it's time to give it up, and it might be time to go back to it later. I'm not a very good art type of person. Like, I know if I see it, if it's nice, but myself putting it together, not so great. But you know what? I came back to it recently and I developed my own website. It actually looks pretty good. I'm pretty proud of it. I had to use AI to help me out, but I took another stab at it. So just being willing to go and do those things, and maybe circling back on something just because you failed on it doesn't mean you shouldn't try it again. Just because you had a setback doesn't mean you can't find a way to get over that hurdle.
Yeah. I love that idea. Although, trust me when I say that painting will never be my superpower. I think my 2.5-year-old can paint better than I can right now. Javier, you've got a fan club already in the chat. So, you're off to a great start. But I'm curious, how do you think about this idea of growth mindset and really captivating it for your career growth?
Yeah, so I'll give you a personal story. So back in 2018, in December, November, December timeframe, early December, I was asked at my agency to serve as the acting HR director. I was a facilities logistics security guy. I was the head of administrative services. I maybe wrote one or two position descriptions in my life, and that was the extent of my HR experience, pretty much. Um, and the chief operating officer looked at me when I said, I don't think I could do this. And he turned my own words on me. He told me, he said, Javier, did you not say that the senior executive service was developed to have leaders and not technicians? And aren't you the one that keeps on telling me that SES should be able to be, moved from agency to agency and office to office to effectuate the type of leadership that's needed? I need a leader during this time to keep the boat afloat so that we could get through whatever we need to get through. So I said, yes, sir, you're right. I may have had some other choice words for him in jest. What I did not know at the time, and maybe he had a crystal ball, my first day was December 10th of 2018. And for those of you that remember, December 20th at midnight, we started the longest ever government lapse in appropriations, which lasted 35 days, which was uncharted territory. You want to talk about a growth mindset. Thank you, Macy. Macy worked for me at the time. Um, I learned from every single person in that division. I went in there and I said, I know nothing from an HR perspective, and I'm going to learn as much as I can to try to help you do your jobs as the experts, right? So while I don't fancy myself as an HR specialist, I think I learned enough during that time to be a little dangerous. And I could tell you it was the best 8 months of my career. It was hard. There were long days. We had daily calls about, what do we do next? I had to sign 1,500 furlough notices. It was crazy. It was chaotic, and it was beautiful. The grit
Oh,
to protect them and to help them do their job is what I love the most about it. If I had a fixed mindset, I would have never had that great opportunity because I would have told the COO, thanks, but no thanks. He was not going to force me, and he said that. If I did not have that curiosity, like Josh said before, to learn something new, I'm sure I would have been fine in my career, but I would have never had that amazing opportunity.
yeah. So Ty, we got a question into the Q&A portal. And for our attendees, I just want to note the Q&A portal, no one else can see what you're asking. So it is a private opportunity to ask questions. But the person said, how do you reconcile the need for growth with pressure of being a provider for your family? Sometimes it is a risk and something has to give. You need a paycheck to take care of your family, but you also, and I cannot pronounce the Japanese word that you said.
Aikigai.
Ikigai, yes, as well. How do you balance those? Can you have your cake and eat it too? I think that's a great question.
I think it is. I was reading that question as well as my colleagues were talking. You were asking them questions about risk. And so curiosity came up and challenge came up. And so I think, Josh, you mentioned curiosity, and Javier, you mentioned challenge. And it's our ability, the human's capacity to take in risk and deal with it and have some measure of it. I think risk, there's two types of risk, right? And this is to answer the question. One is to be risk phobic. I'm scared as hell and I am out of here, which means that I am more apt to run away from what feels like it's risk. And then there's risk philic, which means that I am moving towards taking risk. But I think both of those are speak to this idea of how do I measure it? I think that has to each one of us has to take into account what bit of risk we're willing to take, both the ones that we have to run away from because it could injure not myself, but others, and the risk that I'm willing to move towards because it might be on the other side. I'm willing to learn something, but they're measured. I believe they're measured by the capacity to have curiosity and take on the challenge and to be curious. And here's I almost said creativity, but I am a fan of imagination, right? That I had an opportunity to do a keynote at NASA, and I said that we need to have the audacity of imagination. Because unlike AI is very creative. It can put stuff together, but the human has the imagination. And so when you think about the risk, what can I imagine that is both absolutely wonderful at and completely painful? And can I measure those two to allow me to make a smart decision? And so I don't know if you can have your cake and eat it too, but I think that you can think about what it means to have cake and to make it and to eat it as well.
Yeah. So I will say for myself, I really have trouble getting out of the day to day. I think of my to-do list, it's long, it's lengthy, it's never ending. And so the idea for me, myself, to think bigger picture, to have that growth mindset is really difficult. I have to actually carve out time in my schedule to do it. I'm curious, Josh, and then Javier, where are your biggest challenges in making growth mindset a priority? Where do you run into trouble? So I'll start with you, Josh.
I'm very, very similar to you, Emily, in that if I don't put it on the calendar and hold myself accountable to spending some time doing that,
Accountabilities.
yeah, I mean you're not going to do it. I mean it's going to be pushed back. Part of the job of being a chief data officer for state government is that you need to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening. Where are things going? You can't be complacent, which means you need to take time, a percentage of your time to go out there and learn what's happening, read some things, watch some videos, do some hands-on with demos. Those are all really important things. But if you get too ground down in the continuous meetings and all the problems and running around with the fire extinguisher, you forget to do that. There's things that I really loved, and that was fingers on keyboard all the time. I loved it when I was lower and I was doing it a lot. And you kind of lose the ability to do those things in terms of taking on a large project, but being intentional about making time to still do the things that you enjoy, jumping in with some colleagues and collaborating on some things so you can build your skill set that way. All these are important and easy ways. And growth doesn't mean it has to be big and fast. I mean, you could take little snippets of your time. When we created our data proficiency program back during COVID, the lessons for that were 12 minutes and a couple of readings. And then after 5 of them, you could take a knowledge quiz. And so many people enjoyed it. We had 8,000 badges earned when I left state government. And I had people that were cold emailing me saying, thank you for this, thank you for this. And it was basic, like data 101. And it doesn't take too much time. It could be really approachable. It only takes 15, 20 minutes out of your day, and it's a good break from the monotony of your day-to-day routines.
If I could, real quick, and this is important. I'm sorry, Javier, but it's really important. Josh talked about risk, and there's been some questions about how do we manage the risk, and you hit on something I think it's very important, and that is risk isn't an all or nothing, right? This growth is not all or nothing. It is not binary. It can be you can test your way into greater growth, right? So Josh said, here's a 12-minute opportunity for you to learn something. It didn't cost you anything except a little bit of time, a little bit of cognitive energy, and sitting at your desk, making and getting up every once in a while to make sure your butt doesn't fall asleep, right? It was small. It was experimental. It created space for you to test the risk, right? I think that this growth mindset, even as we look at the picture, it was binary. You either have it or you don't. And I think it's a false option. I really do think it's false because now what you're trying to do in risk is understand the art. It's so cliche, the art of the possible, which is fine, but it's what can I take? What can I learn? What is possible? I learned that. Okay, cool. What do I do? I want to learn more about that. Go and test it. As a coach for lean for startups, I foot stomp, test, experiment, 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 and experiments are small. They are limited. They are focused. I want to learn one thing. Don't try to learn 14 things at one time because it will overwhelm you. And then you just retrench. You take off and you run. Sorry, Javier. It just struck me that what you said, Josh.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Ty. What I'm thinking about is sometimes a growth mindset doesn't necessarily need to lead to career promotion or position. It may just be doing your job better. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Number one is we're all busy, right? Folks are busy doing their day to day. And, both Ty and Josh are right, and Emily as well. If we get bogged down, we could spend 8, 9, 10 hours just, making widgets, right? Responding to emails, making phone calls, checking off to-do lists, et cetera. I have tried to be intentional about spreading my wings to a certain extent and being in a support function where I currently am. I'm trying to better serve my customers through my subordinate colleagues. So what I do is I ask people, hey, you're having all hands today. Do you mind if I sit in? No, nobody mind. Why? I just want to listen. And what'll happen is I'm taking in, so say the Office of Audits, is talking about their reorganization, or they're talking about an audit that they're doing, something like that. I now have additional information, that I learned more about the organization. So that's my personal growth, but it's also something that I could take back to my team and say, have you realized this? And the more they know, the better they could serve their customers. In addition, I do it with my own team. I just had an IT meeting with my IT folks about an hour ago, and they briefed me on things and I asked questions. And again, I'm not an IT specialist or even come close. But the more I know about that, I could then answer the second, third, potentially the fourth question before I have to go back to my team to answer the question for our customers. So it's not always about, what's next on the career ladder, but it's about how do I better support my customers or how do I better do my job going forward?
That makes a
Mm.
whole lot of sense. So, Javier, I'm sticking with you for a hot second here because someone said, how can someone in a growth mindset talk to their supervisor who has a fixed mindset to be respected, trusted, and a belief of being able to do more? So, sometimes our ability to grow requires some other folks to be participants in that journey in some capacities, not always, but sometimes. So, what do you do if you've got someone who is, we do this, this, and this, and we do it my way or the highway? What do you do in that scenario?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is somebody taught me many years ago that they went to their boss and said, instead of saying, "Hey, I want to do this, I want to do that," they turned it around and they said, "I have some bandwidth. What could I take off your plate?" That
Ooh.
was an immediate change of conversation. So instead of I want, it was, oh, this person wants to help me. Oh, okay. How do we get there? And then it was more of that collaborative conversation of, oh, if I send you to this training, you could help me do this. Or if I relieve you of some of these more mundane duties, you could focus on this project for me, which I've been trying to start, but I haven't had the bandwidth to do. So that's what immediately comes to mind. The second thing is, and specifically from the federal government perspective, it should have always been that case. Right now, people need to demonstrate value, right? Both as an employee, as a supervisor, as a team, right? So now is the time. If you didn't have, the gumption before to ask those questions, now is the time. How could I help you? What else can I do? I have some time. What can I learn? What is it that you need for me to do, not only for you now, but for the organization as a whole, so that we could continue our mission. I think that's the right attitude. I think it would be really unfortunate if folks in today's day and age are not willing to at least entertain that conversation. Yes, there are widgets that have to be made in certain areas. We understand that. But if somebody's willingly telling you, I have bandwidth, I want to learn more. I'll tell you, my first boss in my career when I was managing condominiums, he said, Javier, you may only do one slice, but you want to learn the entire loaf. And that stuck with me for the last 30 years. And what he was telling me is like, you may manage these three buildings, but you want to know the budget side of property management. You want to know the risk management part of property management. You want to know the insurance piece. You want to know how to negotiate utilities, right? Things like that. And that just stuck with me for literally 30 years now. And that's how I've approached anybody that has asked me that question.
Yeah. All right, we've got a lot of questions and not a lot of time left. So, gentlemen, prepare for rapid fire formats. Josh, you're up first, and it's a follow up to the question I just asked Javier here. It says, what if your manager won't allow you to take anything from them because they're trying to show that they're excelling in their career, or maybe they're a micromanager, or who knows why they're not releasing more information to you or more opportunities, I should say. Is that a time to simply move on, or can you dig your heels in and find new opportunities there?
I think that there's one growth skill, and a lot of what Javier was talking about falls into this, that everybody should kind of look to, and that's managing up. You figure out how to manage up. I had all of my staff kind of look at that and say, uh, can you guys go take managing up course on LinkedIn and learn some of these things, because that's how I like to manage. Well, also part of that is finding out and asking, how does your supervisor like them? What's their management style? How do they like to manage? Are they, if they're a micromanager, engage with them on, how can I help you with more proactive updates or anything along those lines? So yeah, if you can get those conversations going, if you can learn how to manage up, even if it's someone that's taking on everything to be successful, part of managing it up is understanding what your boss needs to be successful, and maybe helping them get there even though you're not getting the credit for it,
Yeah.
because that person's going to move up and they're going to remember that. And they're going to help you throughout your career. They're going to have that respect for you. They're going to have that knowledge that you can grow and that you can learn, and that you're going to be the first one to step up into things. So I think there's always opportunity there. Start the conversation. Start the conversation. Start working on your managing up skills, and really just grasp the opportunity. And if it still doesn't come, and you really want to grow, I'd say pull the parachute.
Yeah. And we always love hearing the next generation of public servants in the background. So, hello, Josh's kids. We love them. All right, Ty, we got a question in here that says, how do you work in a growth mindset and lead your team to do the same so that we can all grow? So, if you are a manager, how do you get your folks thinking this way?
No problem. Angie wrote, Angie Piazza, thank you. She wrote, a growth mindset requires setting and sticking to boundaries. And I feel that a lot of people prefer to say yes to everything to make themselves feel important in all the wrong ways instead of operating within healthy boundaries for themselves and others. I love this idea of boundaries because what boundaries allow us to do is to figure out where I begin and where you end, and then we can grow together around that. I have a colleague who created a framework that he calls BART, boundaries, authorities, roles, and task. Right. And if you think about the BART system that runs between Oakland and San Francisco, it allows people to get to do things. But don't let if you don't have a conductor, the train doesn't move. If there's no electricity, the train doesn't move. If there's no passengers, there's no reason to run the train, right? If something happens that actually physically breaks the infrastructure, it doesn't happen. How do you do this? That you do it in terms of, do I have the right amount of boundaries with my team? If I'm the leader, please lead. When are we supposed to do it? Time, task, territory, we call it. That's where accountabilities lead. Can we hold each other accountable? So if my staff says, hey, Smith, you said you're going to do it. I'm like, oh, well, I didn't have time. Do they trust me? Because I've broken the boundaries. Do we have the right amount of authority? As if you ask me to do something, are you going to give me the space? There was another question about micromanagement a little earlier, or this thought about micromanagement. One way to make sure that your people don't do what they're supposed to do is don't give them the space to do it,
Mhm.
to sit on their shoulders, sit on their head. But if you allow them to do it, I think that people are mature enough to say, if you give me the trust, I will, and you hold me accountable, I'm going to do the best thing that I can because I'm going to come back to you because you said you trusted me. Do I have the appropriate role? Some roles are like Javier's. He's the boss. He's the SES in his space. But there are other roles as a consultant who's worked with people who've done this kind of work. If I really want to find out what's going on in Javier's office, I don't go to talk to Javier. I go to talk to Javier's EA because that person has a role that's super important. Because Javier, if they allow that EA to really do their job and to grow in that role, they know everything that's going on. Oh, and by the way, they're going to protect Javier as well. And clarity of task allows organizations to really flourish because when you have huge amount of uncertainty, people feel lost. They'll just walk around in circles. And that's not a growth. That is, as a matter of fact, that's anti-growth because then people become protective because I have to eat and I'll do whatever I need to eat and pay the mortgage and make sure my kids can get their braces. And so I think that when you can hold good boundaries, when you give people clear lines of authority, if you help them understand the role that's not just on their job description, but the one they hold on account of the entire organization, if you have clarity of task about what people are supposed to be doing every day, and that there is a communication pipeline, there's a communication exchange where you can negotiate what those tasks are. Oh my goodness. BART is, by the way, boundaries, authority, role, and task. That's what BART stands for. BART.
So, Javier, I love what Ty just said. But I think there's also the reality for a lot of our federal and state and local friends right now that there's a lot of change happening within organizations, and it's happening in a lot of cases to them, not maybe with them. So, how can you harness this growth mindset when there's so much kind of uncertainty in the air and you're not really sure what maybe your priorities are going to look like from an organizational standpoint next? How do you still grow when there's so much change happening?
Well, I always say that with chaos comes opportunity,
Yeah.
and there's still a job to do, right? And I try to keep folks focused on that, right? You have a job to do. Don't necessarily do anything different that you've done before as far as your current job, but there's going to be opportunities, right? There are things like if you're going to raise your hand, and again, it's not about saying yes to everything, as somebody mentioned before, which is counterproductive. But there's also opportunities that existed before, but maybe they just come to light more clearly, during this time of uncertainty, for lack of a better term. And I think there are opportunities to help, to grow, to learn new skills, to upskill and reskill. Look at the landscape, right? Let's not be worried about how we used to do things or how we do things today, but what's going to happen tomorrow. Emily, you and I have chatted about, AI is not going to replace humans. Humans with AI skills are going to replace humans,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's still, you're always going to need that human intelligence, so there's always going to be something next, something new, something that even may not be related to your current job. And maybe you have to take your own time to do it. I'm a big believer in investing in your own career, even if it means, doing it at 6 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night or 5 in the morning. Right. There are just some things that you're not going to get from your current position or paid for by your current organization that you may just want to say, okay, I'm going to suck it up and I'm going to, invest in my future. So, there are going to be opportunities. People just have to have, their head on straight and notice them when they come across.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. All right, we've got a lot of more questions to get through. So, Josh, someone said, how do you deal with a growth mindset when you're in a rut? Maybe you've been doing the same thing over and over again. Maybe on your personal life, there's some things going on. And so you really haven't had the space to think of a growth mindset. How do you get out of that rut and make sure that you're focusing on this?
Yeah, I think so much of that is you have your head down and you're moving forward, doing the same thing over and over again, and you forget to look back and see how far you've came.
Yeah.
So taking the time to reflect on where you've came, celebrate your wins, even if they're small wins. And what's the best thing to get you out of a rut? That tow truck to come jack you around and say, "Hey, let's go." And that's the growth mindset. Start thinking of those things where you can get some enjoyment. And even if it's not directly related to your career job things that you're doing now, just going out and learning something, getting your hands onto something is going to help you get out of that rut and find, more enjoyment, because the burnout is huge. It's really, really big. Someone coming, recently coming out of government, I can tell you that burnout is it's a real thing, and it takes your brain some time to get readjusted. But having the opportunity to look at what's possible, what can you go out and learn? AI is the new hot topic, and like Javier was saying, AI isn't going to replace people that know how to use AI and how to drive AI to derive value are going to replace people. You can go out and get your hands on so many different parts of AI right now. Go and build things. I'm doing things and I have been doing things that are good for my personal life using AI. So there's a lot of different ways that you can overlap. The things that help build skills for work, but also that help build skills for life and home too. And bring a friend with you, a partner, a kid, an accountability buddy. That always makes it a little bit more fun. Find somebody else that's kind of in the same position and say, hey, we both need to get out of this rut. Let's figure it out.
Yeah. Having a kid with you is the ultimate motivating factor because no one trolls you harder than your child does. That is for sure. All right. So as we come to the end of today's session, I want to get a closing thought really from each one of you. And Ty, I'm going to start with you. I think there's a lot of information out there right now. There's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that are changing. They're changing all the time on a moment's notice, it seems like that. So if folks have listened to today's training, what do you want them to walk away from today's session really thinking about or prioritizing as they focus on their growth mindset going forward?
I think I'm going to follow up Josh's um, what he offered up, and that is to stay curious. I
Mhm.
think it is the lifeblood of growth. It is the thing that allows us to look at the world differently. One of the things in my design thinking world is the most powerful word. Two words are what if? What if
Mhm.
we tried this? What if we tried that? And when you do the experiments in what if world, you don't it is nothing more than a thought experiment, right? You never have to tell anybody if you do a what if. but it's when you actually use it in with another person that you see what happens. I just want to say this: if you wanted to read a really good book, sorry, I can't do it. It's called a more. It didn't show up. I didn't realize that my camera wouldn't pick it up. It's called A More Beautiful Question by Warren Berger, Berger. And the subtext to it is the power of inquiry to spark breakthrough ideas. The power of inquiry to spark breakthrough ideas. Ask questions. Be curious. That's the thing I want you to walk away with.
Yeah. All right, Javier, give us some closing thoughts here.
Yeah, I think being open-minded to add on to the curiosity and to, take that risk of that next opportunity, right? You don't have to risk your livelihood or providing for your family. But think about the second and third, levels after that, right? So it's like playing chess, not checkers. What's in front of you may not seem to be the right move, but may it lead to the right move, right? Sometimes I tell people, if you're on an escalator, you get to the second floor, you may need to get off the escalator, move to the side, and take the next escalator, right? The escalator may not go to the second and third floor. You may need to go to another escalator, and that's whether it's a lateral in a position or doing something different within your organization. But just keeping an open mind is what's next, because that is going to demonstrate not only for you but for others that you're interested, that you're curious, and that you have that inquiry that Ty was talking about.
I think that makes me feel, Javier, personally a little bit better, because I think sometimes I think you have to eat the whole apple, right? But you're saying we can just take a bite and that's still growth. That's still vitamin C or A or I don't know, whatever you're getting. It's still beneficial for you, even if it's not the entire thing. So that definitely makes it more attainable. All right, Josh, give us your takeaway here.
Yeah, I was reading some comments in here about just understanding how to show your manager value, some of these other things that are out there. WSB, write stuff down, do journaling, keep some notes on things. Remember the stuff that you've been doing for growth. See how it's starting to tie together. Start collecting that data and information about yourself. And then as you're being curious, you can look back and say, oh, hey, I did this, this, and this, and I really enjoyed it. How does that start to tie together? How can I get a growth strategy from these things that I've explored through my curiosity? So write stuff down. I mean, I hate journaling and I hate doing all that stuff. And I think most of us that have been in the IT space, writing stuff down like logic and all of that fun stuff is a little tedious. And we've gotten to Agile, which means we don't write as much stuff down, but you still need to. But I think it's just really important for you to be able to reflect on those things. This is where I came from. This is what I've done in the last year. Take some time between Christmas and New Year's, just kind of reflect. And having that all written down, you can go back and kind of look through that and think about what your next year should look like. What's your New Year's resolution? How did all this stuff come together, and what do I think I should start working on next that I'm going to enjoy, and that's going to help me, continue to foster this growth mindset, and it's going to continue to grow and grow and grow as you expand your curiosity and find the things that you're really passionate about, find the things that you're really good at that you may not know, and figure out how you apply those to not only life but your career, and all of that stuff is going to come together.
Yeah. It's so important, because I think of something as practical as like your performance review, right? And we're like, what did you accomplish in this year? And I'm like, I have no idea. I have no clue what happened this year. But if you're kind of taking those dedicated notes as you go, that is a much better and easier question to answer. I want to thank the three of you for providing us your insights with us today. I know you gave us all a ton of insights on the power of pivoting your mindset. So I really appreciate that. Unfortunately, though, that is all the time we have today. I want to remind our I know, it went by fast. I want to remind our attendees, though, there are plenty of resources to download from the resource section of this tab. You've got the book that Ty mentioned, and so many more resources coming your way. But most importantly, we just want to say thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for being part of our community. And most importantly, thank you for the work that you do in making our public service work. So I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you at our next training. Bye, everybody.